Yeah, I saw the play The Merchant of Venice by William Shakespeare. Of course, it was done in Hindi. Presently, I'm going through this book, Materialistic Shakespeare, a history. So he's in his hand, he's holding the book Das Kapital. So, talking about William Shakespeare for the period 1564 to 1616, was an English playwright, poet, and actor, and is widely regarded as one of the greatest writers in the English language. While he wrote many sonnets and poems, Shakespeare is most famous for his 39 plays. His writing is known for its exploration of human nature, complex characters, and the use of vivid language. His most popular works like Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, and Julius Caesar have been performed for audiences around the world. Shakespeare invented hundreds of words and phrases that have become part of the everyday English. You can find them out, like, for example, fashionable and cold blooded, etc. Not much is known about his personal life, but his literary legacy continues to influence writers, actors, and directors around the world. What attracted to me in this book was The Merchant of Venice and the possibilities of historical criticism by Walter Cohen. And before I read out one or two lines from here, let me talk about the play Merchant of Venice. It is a comedy by William Shakespeare set in the Italian city of Venice. It revolves around the themes of revenge and justice. The play follows Antonio, a Christian merchant who borrows money from the Jewish moneylender Shylock. Why? To help his friend Bassanio win the hand of Portia, a wealthy heiress. When Antonio's business suffers a setback and he is not able to repay the loan, Shylock demands 1 pound of Antonio's flesh, which was a condition of the original loan contract. Portia, and he won't budge from there. That was the whole thing. I mean, so much was his hatred for a good Christian Antonio. He just wanted him dead. So Portia, disguised as a lawyer, ultimately saves Antonio by cleverly interpreting the contract. Well, that's what the lawyers ought to do, and they do. Despite its comedic form, the play raises important ethical and social questions of religious intolerance, and that's exactly what is written out here in this essay here. So here I'm just going to read a few lines. It offers an embarrassment of socio-economic riches. It treats merchants and usurers, the nature of the law, and the interaction between the country and the city. But since it is also about the relationship between love and friendship, the meaning of Christianity, and a good deal more, a thematically minded critic, regardless of his or her presumptions, may be in for a bit of difficulty. Yeah, if you're real, because The Merchant of Venice, Lawrence Danson says, dramatizes not the triumph of one set of values over another, but the transformation of conflicts into harmonies that incorporate what at the same time they transcend. So it's written that if you see that Shakespeare's procedure resembles both medieval figural and Hegelian dialectics. Now, what is that? If you're talking about medieval, so what is medieval figural? They are just say the Middle Ages there in Europe, 5th century to 15th century, and it sort of relates to using them as emblems or imitation of the period. So he writes, his writing has the embodiment of all of that during the Middle Ages. And the Hegelian dialects. So what is Hegelian? Some says Hegelian or Hegelian. A framework for understanding how ideas evolve. That is, conflicts can lead to progress through the clash of opposing forces. So opposite forces, you go through that, because after that a higher level of understanding or a better state of affairs can emerge. So all of that you can see in his writings. It's juxtaposed there. And the play has been seen, if you see, as an unambiguous triumph of good Christian over a bad Jew. So, as a deliberately ambiguous triumph of the Christians and the unintentionally ambiguous and hence artistically flawed triumph of the Christians, as the tragedy of Shylock, the bourgeoisie hero, and as a sweeping attack on Christians and Jews alike, if you see that, because he's given both angles for you to understand. One part of you might feel a soft corner for Shylock. If you tickle us, don't we laugh? Or if you, and all of that, what he talks. So this play sort of depicts or shows the problems that were there in his England when he was there. So, of course, people do suggest that it's a romantic comedy. They say this view is partly flawed, and it calls for an unusual set of critical questions, and most important, that it requires us not so much to interpret as to discover the sources of a difficulty in interpreting, to view the play as a symptom of a problem in the life of late 16th century England. So the critics who have studied Merchant of Venice against the background of English history have justifiably seen Shylock, and especially the lending habits, as the embodiment of capitalism. So reading from page 73 of this book, another critic by the name of Thomas Bell expresses a typical sense of outrage. Now is nothing more frequent with the rich men of this world than so writhe about the necks of their poor neighbors, and to impoverish them with a full lucre of usury, say like luster of. So entice people, meaning thereby you entice people with credit. So behind this fear lay the transition to capitalism, the rise of banking, the increasing need for credit in industrial enterprises, and the growing threat of indebtedness facing both aristocratic landlords and above all small independent producers who could easily decline to working class status. So the Merchant of Venice itself is quite obviously pro-capitalist, at least as far as commerce is concerned. It would be more accurate to say that Shakespeare is criticizing merely the worst aspect of an emerging economic system, rather than the system itself. In this respect, moreover, he deviates from the anti-usury tracts and from English reality alike. So this critical essay essentially is a good food for thought, and it's nice to read. So I'm just going to read a little more from page 78 and then leave it for you to go through. There are many essays on other plays. So it's written that, as many critics have observed, that the fact that Shylock is grand as well as pitiable does not in itself imply any structural flaw in the Merchant of Venice. Shakespeare needed an antagonist possessed of sufficient, though perhaps not mythical, stature to pose a credible threat. The sympathy elicited by the Jewish usurer, often a consequence of his mistreatment by Christian characters who resemble him more than they would admit, also serve a plausible formal purpose in the overall movement towards mercy and harmony. In fact, by the end of the trial scene, most of the Christian characters have fairly settled accounts with Shylock. The trouble is that Christianity has not. Although the Christian characters in the play are better than Shylock, the Christian characters not in the play are not. In his famous Jew speech and in his declamation on slavery to the court, Shylock adopts the strategy of equating Christians with Jews to justify his own murderous intentions. So, say the devastating judgments, particularly of the second speech, are allowed to stand, and they tell us that although Shakespeare is defeated and then incorporated in the world of play, in the world beyond the play, his value are pervasive. So we see that the play attempts to establish a congruence between economic and moral conduct, between outer and inner wealth, to depict a society in which human relationships are not exploitative. Such a vision, quite literally a fantasy, simultaneously distracts us from the deficiencies of our lives and reveals to us the possibility of something better. Utopian, mystification and liberation are always inseparable and often, as here, strictly identical. So again, talking about the compromise bit, the justice. So there's a version of this compromise is implicit in Shylock's demand of his bond from the Duke. If you deny it, let the danger light upon your charter and your city's freedom. Act 4, etc. These are the lines. On the one hand, the case acquires such political reverberations because Shakespeare assumes a feudal conception of law in which justice is the central peacetime conduit of aristocratic power. On the other, Shakespeare's threat becomes so grave because the trial is based on a bourgeoisie commitment to binding contracts. Portia's integrative solution reveals the compatibility of rigor and freedom of bourgeoisie self-interest and aristocratic social responsibility. But the profound allegiance to contractual law can make this ideological yoking seem either unjust or precarious responses that indicate the tension between the limits of reality and the promises of utopia in The Merchant of Venice. Read for yourself. A great anthology. I'm showing you the back cover. So it is the encounter between Shakespeare and radical, that is for Marxist criticism, and theory is a two-way street. We find ourselves asking not merely what such critical theory has to tell us about Shakespeare, but also what Shakespeare has to tell us about radical criticism. That is Frederick Jamesden. These are the contributors. So I read the third one, from the third one, Walter Cohen, the others. And this anthology traces the ascendancy of materialistic Shakespeare criticism in the United States and Great Britain over the past decade and a half, receptive to influences of such diverse theories as these people, whatever, the Marxian and all of that, has emerged as a rich interpretive practice. The essays chosen for this book cover all the Shakespeare's dramatic genres and include works as King Lear, Othello, As You Like It, Measure for Measure, The Trumpet, The Merchant of Venice, Henry V, Macbeth, The Taming of the Shrew, and Julius Caesar. That's the ISBN number for you to see. Those are the publishers, Verso, that's the ISBN number. Bringing together the anthology, EIVO KAMPS is an assistant professor in English at the University of Mississippi. So interesting, very interesting, a good read, makes you think. After you've read those plays as fun plays and romantic plays, you get to understand what the playwright is trying to tell you through the characters. You can almost visualize the emotions and the deep set, the culture, etc. of that area, and that is why he's so relevant even today. We are still reading, studying, watching Shakespearean plays.